Good morning, everyone. Thank you for picking this session to attend. I appreciate you all coming over. So, hello, data people. Each one of us, by virtue of interacting with digital aids as well as digital technologies and different systems in the world, we generate a lot of data on our own. What happens when similar data is used for specific purposes by governments, by organizations, and what sort of dilemmas you run into with that is the crux of what I'm going to talk about in the next 40 minutes. I'll try and keep it shorter and open up for Q&A as well. So, I work for a company called Gramener. It's an insights as data storytelling company. We operate we use different toolkits in terms of ML, DL, AI toolkits to work with different enterprises and how do we make sure the enterprise needs are met. I'll start off with a story. This is Avinash Arush. He is a cobbler who works out on a street closer to my home on Pimpli Sadagar. He operates a little over 7 to 8, 9 hours a day. In a typical day, he spends on there. He earns anywhere around 700 to 850 Indian rupees, INR, on a daily basis. And one thing that you'll notice about his operations is these QR codes that you see in the front of him at the booth. So, the service that he provides and the payments that he gets from predominantly from different people, 80% of them come through these online payments. So, vendor would come in, I get my shoe stitched or polished, I open up my phone, scan the QR code here and make the payments. So that's his current distribution of revenue. His collection of cash has gone on so much that bulk of it is through these. And he uses a smartphone that is a mid-range phone. It's not a high-tech phone like an iPhone. It's a very basic phone that it has a 1 gig RAM and a 8 GB more with say a 425 Snapdragon, which is like a 7-year-old architecture. And all of it he's doing through digital means itself. He's not visiting a bank, he's not doing anything else. Now, in India today, with the adaptation of these technologies around in India going on, what is happening is, without this gentleman going to a bank and applying for a loan in a traditional sense where I go fill up a big form, given consent for doing a credit check and all, he's being offered loans like these today with the new breed of fintech companies that are operating out of India, where because they know that he's generating revenues based on invoice-based revenue, which they know because of the digital adaptation, they don't even have to come and do a large process of filling paperwork and getting him on. And this is the kind of offers he's being lured with for credit. Imagine the shift in how things happen in the traditional sense versus the new digital sense. This is the kind of digital Indian ecosystem that is evolving in India right now. How many of you use a smartphone? I'm presuming all of us, right? Just a show of hands. What is the average price you pay to a telecom service provider for 1 gig of data? Any guesses? These are the 4 countries I picked up at random. And out of these, could you guess which country has the largest price, average price for GB? No harm, just 4 options, right?
I think for UK is $1.2 per gigabyte.
Well read, man. And any other guesses? Which other country would have the highest price, average price per gig? 1 gig of mobile data? Right? India, all right, let's look at that. This is the numbers. This was a survey done by cableco.uk. This is a UK-based think tank that did a survey of little over 230 countries and grabbed all the online published pricing plans for digital mobile service providers. And look at this. The countries that are the top of the pinnacle of technology adaptation, US, UK, and China to some large extent of the rapid pace that has done. Look at the average price of GB of mobile phone. It's only talking about the mobile phone pricing. And look at India. This is one of the key drivers as to why the digital revolution is happening in Indian context. And as a summary, this is what it is in India today. When the talk talks about the digital dilemma with India Stack. India Stack is a set of all the digital tools and technologies that have been rolled out in the last decade, where people who are not educated, don't have fancy phones, don't have access to a physical broadband internet service, but are leapfrogging towards the digital adaptation. This is the crux of what I want you to leave with at the end of this session. You have a digital identity system called Aadhaar that has been given to every adult eligible citizen in the country. You have a mobile pay connection penetration, which is equivalent to your adult population who can own the phone. And if you notice these evolving pieces, you have close to half a billion mobile internet users. I'm not talking about just people who have phone who can talk, but actually have internet access over their phones. And the kind of payment ecosystem that you have, the digital ecosystem that you have, this is the place where the entire digital transformation in Indian ecosystem is happening. And mind you, all this with electricity percentage penetration, which is less than 40%. You still have places where you don't have electricity throughout the day. and you have still larger basic human needs. If you look at the Maslow's stack-log pyramid, there are many basic needs that are not met in the country yet. But the leapfrog to digital adaptation, that is a real killer that is happening in the system. Think about all the disruptive technologies or adaptation applications that have come in the last decade. Ubers of the world, Airbnbs of the world come into picture. One thing that is consistently common in all of them is they didn't create the entire ecosystem ground up. They relied on independent, distributed applications, which each one was excelled by somebody else, stitched that together and made that application. So these serve as a shared infrastructure platform that were built, and the applications on top just revolutionize how the industries work, like Airbnb for the hotel industry, like Uber for the cab ride sharing company. All of them rely on an infrastructure that's not their own, but how they stitch together and make it useful is the question. This same mindset and approach was taken for building the India Stack. India Stack was conceptualized as an open infrastructure by Indian government and its think tanks of stitching together and unbundled services for various things that are needed for social good, which is creating a unique identity, signature processing, money exchange, documentation, and data exchange. This is what India Stack is all about. Going back to the first step of how many mobile connections were being made available in India, this is the rapid pace at which the number of subscribers has gone up in the last 5 years. The adaptation of mobiles, mind you again, these are not smartphone adaptations. These are feature phone adaptations that are intelligent enough to run apps, digital apps on them. It's not a fancy phone like an iPhone or a Samsung phone, which we generally associate with the smartphone market. It's much more mid-tier pricing. The pricing is anywhere between 5,000 INR to 7,000 INR, which that's the largest segment of adaptation, which is much less than what you pay for an iPhone, which is little over, say, 50,000 INR in India. So think about it. At 1/10 of the cost, you're getting a device that can let you all the digital transformation exercises that you have access to. Look at the second one. This is the unique. Yes. I'm sorry?
The cobbler you presented, you earned 700 to 900?
Right. This one. Are you referring to? This is the subscriber references. If you look at this, this is the subscriber I'm referring to. Here. You're looking at the left x-axis. Is not clear?
No, it was just like he was earning 700, right?
Yes. 700 to 850, yeah. I'll post all these of it online again, so I can have a chat with you as well. But essentially, the earning is so less on a daily basis, which is less than $8 a day. But the ability of all these India Stack technologies, which lets you get into the digital ecosystem, that's the message that's happening on the ground. And this is this identity-based system where each individual is given a unique ID number, which is a number that is associated with you by virtue of your name, date of birth, your iris scan, and biometrics. That's number one. And the number of bank account numbers that were generated. This is where conventional banking, if you walk into Citibank, any Citibank customers here? Citibank, Deutsche, HSBC. If you walk into any of these banks, you have to have a minimum balance of reserves in the bank account to get all the services. And this was totally moved out of the equation where you have these program called Jan Dhan Aadhaar, which stands for giving banking services to people who can't maintain a high balance. So this was a government-funded long-term view-based policy where bank accounts were created for a large set of people who were not in the digital ecosystem of a formal banking system, but were doing cash transactions. By virtue of providing these accounts to these people and reducing the bar for maintaining minimum balances, all these were brought into the digital ecosystem, which opens up all the credit possibilities for a bulk of people to do. Now, essentially, this is what is the summary. The same numbers I'd given you, if I break it down as to how it was done. The crux of this is you have an identity that was given to each citizen or eligible adult in the country. And the way the identity was given is to this. It's a 12-digit number that is assigned to each adult eligible citizen or resident in the country. It's a combination of your name, date of birth, age, gender, your fingerprints, 10 fingers, and your iris scan. These together provide a unique record for you, which is thus again associated with the 12-digit number. So this is step one. Having this unique identity essentially can give you one form of identity that you can take to any of the government services, private services within the country that are opting into the system. That's number one. This is how a typical assignment happens, where you go in, you take your basic date of birth and proof, you walk in, if you notice the iris scan is being captured right now, there is a green machine there that captures your fingerprints, and the system generates your unique number. And once you capture this information, it is sent to a central location where it is deduped against all possible existing records to make sure that you're not issuing duplicates, and that's how the uniqueness is maintained and the sanity of the system is maintained. One quick note to call out here. This digital identity system crossed the 1 billion mark in just 5.5 years. And for context, if you take across the globe, how many digital systems were able to cross that user base? Look at how long Office took. Look at how long Google searches took. And at the pace at which Aadhaar was able to get to the 1 billion mark, it's a 5.5 year. It was that rapid pace of adaptation of the identity system that led to the digital explosion. The second set of it is the authentication layer. Now I have an ID. I have a 12-digit number. I can take it, walk up to, say, a bank and ask them for credit. Now the bank has to make sure that I'm carrying a piece of paper that says this is my 12-digit number and has a photograph. I need to authenticate that, yes, this person is the rightful owner of the information that is being proposed in a loan. So in order to do that, there is an authentication layer called e-KYC, Know Your Customer, which was rolled out. Earlier, the approach was, if you want to submit a bank application loan or even a student loan for that matter, you fill in a form which is 2-3 pages, have a supporting documentation, Xerox copies of multiple others, income, all these aspects, and then you submit this. The bank takes all of it, verifies it against the original, saying that, okay, I see the original, I see the photocopy, I say that, okay, it's true. Now I take all of these applications, send it to a back office. The back office, again, someone is assigned to the back office who goes through your file. Presuming it's digitized, it takes faster. If it's not, again, the paper has to pass through different offices. You process it, and then you make a decision of yes, no. This whole life cycle change anywhere, depending on the kind of industry you're working. If it's a telecom industry issuing a number, it's say 1 day. If it's a bank, we have to validate risk, it's 6 days. And if you're an asset management company, you're trying to open up a new mutual fund account, it goes longer. All this has been shrunk down to one activity, which is e-KYC, wherein you walk in, you put your finger on a reader, and you enter your Aadhaar number. The app system would match your thumb finger, one of the fingers which the application would given. It matches to the records of the UID authority, which is the central authority holding all this information, and authenticates you saying that, yes, this is the person who's applying for a loan. So think about it this way. In the conventional operations, if I had walked into, say, a Vodafone or an Orange store here in the UK, I would say take at least a couple of hours before the SIM gets activated, isn't it? If that's been the experience. I'll just take a couple of hours. Now, in India, one of the reasons for the explosion of adaptation happened because of a player called Reliance Jio. That was a new player who came on board in the last 18 months. They exclusively went in for Aadhaar-based e-KYC. What effectively it meant was the entire identification step was reduced to 2 seconds. So an applicant would come into the store. In a 3 to 4 minute transaction, they would walk out of the store with a SIM that is actually working. Imagine the kind of experience that customers get. And the pace at which it was able to done, that particular provider was able to add 110 million new subscribers in an 18-month window. If you just break it down by that, if it was conventional way of doing processing, the application would have taken days together, and 110 applications would just take years to complete, just by the conventional way. That's the speed at which the e-KYC is bringing in. And look at the spike in number of Aadhaar-based e-KYC transactions happening in the country. The volume of enterprise that are adapting this e-KYC has just exploded because it minimizes the operating cost. What it essentially is, for the same capacity of resources that you have, the throughput that you can get out of your teams is much higher. So if your average transaction cost is going down, your price point for making money out of a transaction actually starts improving. I don't need to sell. I don't need. A Citibank would not have to look at 10 customers who have minimum balance of $10,000 to make a margin. Versus if I had an ability to do the same KYC at a much lower price point, my average balance could come down. That's simple economics. If your costs are lower, your ability to get on to profitable margin gets higher with a lower transaction value, but a higher transaction volume. That's essentially what is happening in the country right now. This is an example of how the verification happens. I enter my Aadhaar number, that's how I carry it, and I put one of the fingers and it gets verified. That's it. This is the speed at which the usage is being happening. Now we got through identification, we got through verification. The third part about it is the payments ecosystem. Entire e-commerce, entire commerce is done on a value that is being agreed upon for a good and how you exchange the value. In this case, it's money. And hard currency is always tough. For you to have cash, carry it, roam around banks, all of it is hard. So the digital adaptation of transfer payments. There is a banking ecosystem that was created called NPCI, National Payment Corporation of India. They created a unified framework called UPI, Unique Payment Interface. this essentially would look at every bank account associated information is exposed through a VPA called a virtual private address. All you got to do is, when you go to a person who is in the ecosystem, give your VPA key. You don't have to share your bank account details, your ABA routing numbers, none of these is required, just your VPA ID. Taking that, you could essentially start making all the payments. And this was how the country was before 2016 when the UPI system was turned on. The adaptation was so low, number of bills being paid. But after this, when the system was rolled out, this essentially goes back to all the people who were earlier out of the digital system. Remember the Arush in the first photo, the cobbler who had these QR scan codes on his box in the first picture? That's essentially what is happening. This QR code itself is your gateway for payments, and all the payments are no longer need to be handled in cash. The point of owning, keeping, retaining, securing, depositing, all of it is taken care, and everything is moved to the digital wallet. Look at how the transaction volumes happen. This is specific to India again. The volume of this orange represents the volume of credit cards and banking card transactions that happen in the country. And look at this blue line, which is the UPI-based payments, which essentially I no longer have to carry a purse with all my cards. All I need to do is have a mobile phone that has an internet connection and can run a set of apps. I could perform transactions anywhere in the country, wherever I can see that QR code, scan it, end of story. This is the power of adaptation. And if you look at this, the volume of transactions that happen are in millions every month. There was a good statistic that was published by the government sometime back. In December of 2018, the total value of transactions that happened through the UPI channel exceeded the total yearly volume of transactions happening on the American Express network globally. That's the scale at which these systems are able to withstand. And the value of these are not because of the transaction value. It is primarily because of even people, if I go to a cobbler and get a shoe polished, I pay say 20 to 30 rupees. That's all. But if I can do that digitally, the number of people who can opt into the system is too high. And that's where it's fueling all this strength. Then the paperless layer. This essentially goes back to the point I was making. When you apply for an application loan, instead of filing in 40 more adjoining papers or photocopies of different documents showing your proof, age, income sources, your past histories and all, everything is taken care of and made available through a centralized digital locker system, which is again unique to you based on your Aadhaar link. So I can take my driving license, my ID cards, my bank, my credit score, everything is tied to this. I don't even have to carry a physical copy. It's all stored in the digital locker. And a good example of this is I have a driving license. How many of you drive? Wonderful. You have a driving license in your pocket? So in India, the driving license is tied to your Aadhaar number. And all the Aadhaar associated linked information is part of the digital locker system. So in this instance, a driver is being stopped for a police check, and they don't pull up their actual purse and take out the driving license card. You open up your phone, open the digital locker app, and show the driving license, which appears like this. And there's just one example. Government today supports a little over 300 plus service-based ID information in the digital locker system, as long as you associate it and give the consent. The last step is consent layer. The digital locker system gives a unique view of your entire digital life in terms of what you have done, what you have done, transactions, your history, your education, certificates, marks, everything in one central place. Now, the consent layer, which is still in the works, essentially gives each citizen the power to say, I want to share my information with only this bank, not this bank. Or I want to revoke the permission I'd given to say my bank earlier to look at my past history, and I no longer want to share that information. So all of this is being managed to a central location right now. This is the framework that is being put in place, where you are the consent holder. And there are different players in the system who actually have a fiduciary responsibility to collect this information, give the citizen a way to say which bank I want to give access, which NGO I want to give access, which employer verification is a very common thing. You go through background checks. Instead of going through the whole cycle of who you were, what you were, where did you land, when did you educate, all of it is in digital space now. So by giving a consent to say my prospect employer through the digital locker system, I reduce the turnaround time for them to make a decision. And the costs come down because entirely it's on the digital infrastructure. There is no physical handshake transactions happening. This is the final step of how the adaptation is being made more structure driven. All the things that I've shown you so far and the numbers that I've quoted is dated already. We are in April, and most of the numbers I pulled were from December of 2018. That's the pace at which all of this is happening. And this gives you a sense of when the digital infrastructure is created and the infrastructure drives innovation for all the applications that can be built on top of it, the kind of power that you get and this is keeping in mind with a country that is culturally different, that is not, the per capita income is still very low compared to any of the advanced countries, and economically it is still poor if you look at any of the capable incidences. In any metrics that you compare against OECD metrics or World Bank reports, the per average income is still quite low in India as a country. When you have a 1.4 billion people, it's bound to drag down. If the denominator is so large, your numerator has to be very high, which is not the case. And with a $2.5 trillion economy overall, the average citizen's net worth is still low. And how does that essentially drive towards usage of that is the dilemma I'll get into next. This is a summary of all the things that have been attempted with Aadhaar and the kind of benefits that were being talked about. Governments were able to, India as a developing country, you have the citizens expect the government to take care of a set of benefits which they want. So earlier it used to be a case of I submit a set of proofs that I am eligible for this government benefit and I get the benefit out. By virtue of linking all the benefits and rolling off all the systems to Aadhaar-based verification systems, the kind of benefits that came up with, these are a few examples. In the state of Andhra Pradesh, when the government direct minimum employment program was moved to this ID-based verification system, the number of enrollees, suddenly 10% of them disappeared. All the earlier ones that were bogus ghost numbers in the system vanished because they were no longer able to prove that they were actually the same person. This is the kind of leakage that happens in government systems which is being plugged right now. And there is one other good example. How many of you have gas at home where you turn on the knob and start cooking or heating the kettle for water? In India, because of how the geography is laid out, it's still a cylinder-based thing where you have a 13 kg cylinder that gets shipped, that gets delivered to your house and doing things. The government earlier used to pay a subsidy to the companies that were selling the gas cylinders, not the actual users. They just flipped this by way of the citizen still has to pay the market price, and the government, after verifying that you actually made the payment against your Aadhaar-based system, would actually give you the benefit of subsidy, which is, say, cylinder is at 700 INR. You would get back 150 rupees after your verification that you are a person who has linked your Aadhaar to the delivery system, and you're actually consuming it in your own house because you're paying upfront for it. And then the subsidy is sent to your bank account directly. By doing this again, there was an 11% drop in the number of cylinders being ordered in the first place. Earlier, it was a case of I buy it on my name, I sell it in the black market for a higher price, or I benefit from the government subsidy because even though I'm not eligible, because the government is not going to go back and check that the beneficiary is eligible or one. These are the kind of benefits that are rolling out. Access to microcredit. We talked about this in Arush, the first case. If a person who is earning 700 to 750 as a daily net income, if he is being targeted by fintech companies to offer credit, imagine the kind of strength that as an entrepreneur, if you're going on, having access to credit is one of the key differentiators from getting successful in your operations versus just closing shop and moving on. That's one key differentiator that has been evolving, which is benefiting the entire country, where people have getting access to formal credit, which they were not eligible for because of the conventional systems. And lower transaction cost, we talked about how getting the price point from, say, paper-based KYC, which is at 100 rupees per transaction, to less than 3-4 rupees, essentially opens up a large possibility of potential customers who were earlier out of the system. So India is becoming data-rich overall from a data-poor country. And in a true sense, it's a data democracy now, where anyone look at. And we all know democracy is a double-edged sword. And democracy on its own has many dilemmas. That's for a different discussion. But in today's context, the democracy which we are talking about, the principal point of a democracy would be that you don't do harm to citizens. You, a group of people, elect your representatives with the intention that you don't do any harm. But the way the whole India stack system has evolved, this is a snapshot of how newspapers have been reporting the kind of things that are happening in the India stack system. This is the dilemma I'm going to get into. So far, I painted a rosy picture of how the system is doing wonders, and now I'll get into the not so wonderful part of it and how the system is causing different interpretations. So the identity layer that we talked about, which is unique identification. Surprisingly, people have been able to get 2 Aadhaar IDs for the same person, same biometrics and iris. So the system that's supposed to be foolproof has kinks in the armor. There have been reported instances of this. Citizens, by virtue of, if I'm an old person or I'm a disabled person who can't get to a Aadhaar center where I can get an Aadhaar number, I'm virtually locked out of the system now. I'm being denied access to my pension, my wages, and in recent instances we have noticed that people who were eligible to vote were not allowed to vote because the system didn't find a match for you against another database. Though you have been sitting in the same residence for 30 years and have been voting in all previous cycles of election in a democracy, but with the new system, because of you didn't register for Aadhaar or you didn't link it, your right to vote, which is the essential of a democracy, is being denied. And what happens if people do not have few fingers missing, or I'm blind? All these disabled possibilities of specially able people come into picture. How do you manage that? That thought process has not been put in. So if somebody has a constraint, or you have a fire burn or a cut on the finger, what happens at that point? All such edge cases have been left out. And those are the kind of troubles that the system is now slowly facing, and which have not been thought about during the design phase. This is an example of how in India, if you want to register a marriage, you are supposed to show proof of what your identity. And the digital ecosystem has gone ahead, but government-run functions which don't keep pace with technology still go with the paper-based system. An example of this is a marriage certificate issuance group. This is how, when you apply for a marriage certificate for special marriage cases, you are supposed to publicly state that we want to get into a legal relationship, and this is our documentation. And this was a picture I walked into office and grabbed the picture without having to worry about anything. What it essentially shows you is there is no protection of your unique identification. It is left out this way. And the people who are in this picture, they don't have any legal recourse if something bad gets done with their ID numbers. That's a big problem. There is no data protection layer legally right now. The adaptation just went through the roofs, but there is no follow through in terms of government policy that can look at. Then let's look at the second layer, which is the authentication layer. The authentication layer, again, the problems are same. The amount of failure rate of the fingerprint machine I was talking about is little over 50% right now in some systems, which is a very high number. So essentially one person would have like, okay, give me one more try, give me one more try. And if you are a person who had taken an Aadhaar, say at the age of 10, by the time you turn 20, your finger patterns move. These change. So you have to go again, re-upload, re-register, re-verify. And for people who don't have damaged fingers or things like these, how do you verify them? There were improvements that were brought in where mobile-based one-time payment passwords were being sent to the registered mobile phones to do authentications, but the problem still persist. And the best of all is, the whole idea was your fingerprint is unique to you. So when you do verification, there was one government agency in the state of Telangana and the city of Hyderabad. There were a little over 15,000 sweepers who keep the city clean. They had rolled out an Aadhaar-based daily attendance verification system where you would go punch in your finger so that you know this is the same person who came to work today. Now, it so happened that there was a bunch of these creative folks within that ecosystem. They were able to figure out to generate an exact replica of my finger for less than 15 rupees per finger. So essentially, there was a case where the cops had identified a ring that was doing this, where they had a series of boxes, and the boxes had the individual sections. Each section had a name of the employee and their associated finger. So, so you could just put your finger in, take the wax glove, and then put it on the machine. And they had these rack with 300 fingers ready to go every day. So that's the kind of manipulation that is happening in the system. You could, if the government was able to think through about setting up a good system like that, people are ingenious to beat the system at a much faster pace. So that's one of the problems that we are looking at. All the India Stack ecosystem was conceptualized in terms of savings. There was a lot of talk on public, in general, about how the system would benefit and give government cost savings. World Bank had chimed in talking about $11 billion saving on an annual basis of all the government programs that were run. And the funny part is, if you start looking at, I work in the data space, so when you start looking at those reports and try to understand where they came from, there is no factual, fact-based reporting that actually drives towards these numbers. Every time these numbers are quoted are based on hypothesis projections alone. So the real value of saying that this program gave us this much saving hasn't come out yet. It's still, people are getting onto the system of adaptation. Who is benefiting is still an open question. And the last piece of it is the consent layer. When I talked about consent, the final layer of me having control over giving out, it's still in the works. So the system never got to a point where I have control over who is accessing my information. It is still stuck at a point where a bank would come to me and say, hey, I'll process you for a credit card, but there is no stopping the bank from taking that same information, applying for selling cross products, because I want to have control over who it gets shared with. There was a case of where Airtel, one of the largest telecom providers in the country, had opened up a bank, Airtel Bank, to control digital wallets payment, one of their offerings. It so happened that all the customers, 100 plus million customers who had done verification using Aadhaar, the bank very conveniently took the same consent and opened up bank accounts on their name. Because I had consent for one service, it was taken, little 110 million bank accounts came up from their service because I had the consent in the first place. Because the law was very dicey on what you can do, cannot do. This is the kind of problems that we are running into. And the worst part is, once you open a bank account and it's associated with your Aadhaar, whenever you're getting money in, money flows in, right? So people were looking at some of the pension money, some of the transfers that were happening to them based on Aadhaar, were going to a new bank account they didn't even know they had on their name. That's the kind of troubles we ran into. This was one of the frauds that was causing little heartburn to the entire digital ecosystem. The reason I'm bringing this up is the intention of the system was good, but when during execution, so many things come up, and that is where the dilemma is right now in the country. That's the summary of the dilemma I was referring to. The whole talk was about how the promise is real, it's achievable, but the dilemma today is without a legal framework for where citizens have a say in protection, privacy, transparency, and control over who gets access to my information, all the work that we are doing is essentially still work in progress. The bigger trouble of all this system is that if I have let's take an example of I have a bank account and I have money in it. The bank is legally obligated if something happens, a transaction happens which is not authorized. You have a period of 7 days to report. You have a period of 30 days to contest, and then you can get your money back. Or a credit card, for that example, you can always contest the transaction on the credit card because legally the bank is supposed to honor any dispute claims you do. In case of Aadhaar-based system, think about it. The system has my iris scan, my fingerprints, but there is no legal protection of what happens if this information is taken by somebody else. That's the dilemma that people are in. There is a strong portion of the society that wants to abolish this entire system today in the country because there is no legal protection. The government made an attempt in 2018, end of 2018, to open up a draft data protection bill that was inspired by GDPR to some extent and the California privacy law to some extent, and tried to contextualize it for the Indian ecosystem. But as we know, morality is the problem. What is moral in one culture is not the same morality in a different culture. So adaptation from GDPR or California privacy law would not directly fit into the Indian context because the moral argument is different. How many of you have visited India? Wonderful. So if it's likely that if you are on a train ride, say for 6 hours, and by the time you get off the train, we Indians are very inquisitive, so we ask questions and we share information. In a train ride, you could easily get to a point that if you travel with someone on a long distance train for say 12 hours, I could actually tell more about me because of the conversations and vice versa when I get off the train. Because the cultural mindset is that you can share information freely. This goes back to the point of, in a developed society, the society is already, the average income is high, which means the society is considered as economically rich. When it comes to Indian context, the society overall, the average income is still less. So economically, you're still poor, but your ability to share data, by culturally you're more open. Your inquisitiveness and your interest to share data is high. So with respect to data, you're rich. So the business models that have to come into the country to make use of it is, how do you take that rich data, but economically poor, and come up with service offerings that match these two together. You still have to make money. So every service provider has to look at how do you build applications or services on top of the entire Indian digital ecosystem where your transaction cost is still lower so that you can still meet the low economic market need, but you're data rich. Essentially, you have to build models that rely on data availability, but lower transaction, but high volume, thereby making up the revenue model. And that's essentially what is happening in Indian digital economy today. Companies are racing towards getting that price points of service offering that can essentially come back to Arush, who is a cobbler who gets a little over 700 to 750 per day for his entire day's top line income, and how does he get incorporated into the financial system. And that offers that I showed you in the beginning of credit, that offer had helped Arush to pick up a medical insurance policy for the first time in his life for him and his family, because that kind of money upfront was never possible for him to pay for the premium for a yearly basis. That's the kind of changes that are coming to the country right now. But the dilemma still is very valid. The dilemma with how do you manage your data in the Indian context is an ongoing exercise, We are working, as a technologist, we work with different government agencies to recommend and advise them on how this should happen. But the pace at which bureaucracy moves, drafting a new regulation is very high. And on average, the policy time in Indian context takes little over 15 years for a policy to go live, assuming the policy goes live and then you implement it. And by the time the pace of technology which is happening with the digital world, I can only imagine that won't be enough anytime soon. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. We are on. And please score the session if you get time. We'll be happy to hear your feedback. These are some of the people who had helped me come up with the information for me to put to this entire session. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming over. Bye.
Questions to Sundeep?
Sure. Please. I'll come over. Yes. Yes, India is a federal state.
That pass as a national system throughout all the different
Yeah.
states?
The way it was done is through a central government law, Aadhaar Act, that was passed. They made it mandatory as an ID-based system for all central government services. That was step one. The state governments, by virtue of lack of ability to create such a similar system, they got onto the bandwagon of piggybacking on the system that central government had laid out. So the identity, Aadhaar, and all the infrastructure was a central government controlled, because finance is controlled at a central level, the revenue and sharing. So it started at a federal level, but states were quick enough to jump on the bandwagon given the benefits they could get. That's how the adaptation increased. The one key thing that was done is Aadhaar was made mandatory for anyone to file the central taxes. So day one, when the rolled out, it was ensured that the PAN, which is a unique number for filing your tax returns earlier, had to be linked with the unique ID, which is Aadhaar. The moment that happened, it became open season for everyone to look at if that link is established by government, the legal framework has been set up, and all the private players, like the telecom players were referring to 110 million in new customers in 18 months. They just went to the cheapest transaction cost service, and all of them got in bandwagon. The whole point of adaptation was only triggered or accelerated by the lower transaction costs that the platform was able to bring in. That's where the economics overrode all the questions about legality, who controls what, is there a framework for protection, none of it were looked at. Lower transaction costs. And the drop, like for the e-KYC system, 100 rupees was an average price across different service providers for paper-based verification. When I say average, there have been transactions like mutual funds or high investments or much higher, 1,000 plus for verifications. But the moment you bring it to e-KYC, it's like 4 rupees per transaction for verification. That essentially blows up all your math about who should be your target audience. And that's the power of economic driver that helped for this adaptation so far. And it's still being the same case.
There are no differences on state level, like
Nope.
state blocking because of that?
No. That's the beauty of how it is shaping up. Even if the state can only restrict you from doing or using the system for state authorized activities alone. And that's only for a small set of people if you look at the overall population. There was a court case in the Supreme Court which went all the way to the Supreme Court of India, which essentially said you cannot mandate linking of an Aadhaar ID system for all the services you provide. Government cannot do that. So that led to some of the slowdown in the adaptation. But the way it was left open was, it is not mandatory but optional. The ease at which the adaptation happened, even an optional service becomes much more lucrative for people as well. Like if I walk into a telecoms, I want to take a new service, and IC says that if you do e-KYC, you can walk out with a SIM in like 4 minutes, versus if you go the old way where you submit all the paperwork to me, I have to verify these, it would take 1 day before you can start using your phone. It's a no-brainer. I would definitely, as a consumer, I want the fastest, cheapest, and quick service. And the urge to get something faster overrides so many other dilemmas that we have, which few strong vocal set of group are raising this concern, and we have been a good debate going on in India as to what should be the legal framework, how it should be done. But the pace at which adaptation is happening because of ease of use, I think the bus is already gone. It's no way we could pull that back at the moment, unless a drastic action of killing this whole system happens. It's only a case of trying to operate on an engine when the car is actually running. That's where we are right now. That's the only analogy I can think of. It's you open the hood, it's still running, and like, hey, by the way, I need to tighten a few more, but the car won't stop now. So that's where we are. That's the crux of the dilemma. That's the whole message I wanted to bring into this talk. Does it answer your question? Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.